Okay, so let's begin. So after attending this workshop, you should be able to define what is secondary data and be able to identify some benefits to using it within your project or research. Also, be able to identify your secondary data needs um, and what secondary data do not fit into your needs. You should also be able to pinpoint exactly what data you need for a given project. We will also explore some common secondary data issues so that you can feel confident that you are choosing the right data. And finally, we will explore a variety of strategies you can employ when looking for data to help you be more familiar with where you can search for data sets. So no matter where you are in your career, whether you are a student looking for a project, a researcher trying to incorporate supplemental data into your research, or an instructor seeking to teach students about these concepts for a project, this workshop will provide you with the tools to get started. This workshop may also be useful for individuals looking to share their data, as pinpointing your data needs will identify steps you can take to make your data more reusable, and data finding strategies will provide a starting point for identifying where your data can live long term. This workshop is a little information dense, so feel free to ask as many questions as you need. I will be monitoring the chat, so you can feel free to type your question in there, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly if that's easier. So without further ado, let's get started. So why secondary data? Secondary data is collected by someone else or by the same researcher for a different purpose than the original reason for collecting that data. This can also be data collected for the greater good, such as environmental data that informs policy. Uh, there are a lot of benefits to using secondary data. So collecting primary data is resource intensive, requiring both funding and personnel time. So if you're using secondary data, you can bypass some of that. Um, if you are using several sources of secondary data, it can also be more representative because you can tap into a larger audience than you can collect if you were just using a sample in your primary data alone. This may also allow for looking at changes over time if the sources gathered data on the same topic at multiple time points. In addition to that, a commitment to reusing data marks a shift to a more open source model where high data quality and documentation are most valuable, and researchers who put forth effort into creating a reusable data set are rewarded with citations. It's also an untapped source of potentials. It's unlikely that the original researchers exhausted all possibilities or answered all the questions. Secondary data allows data a new life, acting as a resource for researchers unaffiliated with the original project to view the data with fresh eyes and come up with novel hypotheses. And it's also an excellent teaching tool. It allows students to experience the research process, reinforcing concepts and best practices to better prepare them to do good research in the future and to share it. So even though secondary data has a lot of benefits and there are a lot of reasons that you might want to use it, there are times when it might not be the best choice for you. So if you're looking to answer a specific question with your research, you may find that the information you are looking for has not been collected. This may force you to come up with a substitute for the variable you wanted to look at, or combining several data sets with missing values, which may result in higher errors or less power in your analyses. By collecting your own data, you are controlling who is in your sample and asking the precise questions you are looking for answers to. And your results may be more up to the data, may be more up to date than information gathered in the past. By collecting your own data, you may also be more aware of its limitations and biases, which is something that's sometimes difficult to know in secondary data. However, using both types of data can be a powerful combination because even if you are planning on conducting primary data collection, investigating what secondary data is available might give you a better understanding of what information is already out there, which prevents duplication of work. It may also be cost-saving as you could potentially compare your novel data to a larger body of research that's already available. So we talked a little bit about how secondary data is data that is being reused for a different purpose and why it can be useful for your research. Regardless if you are using secondary data as the only data in your research or as the basis of a project that will be collecting primary data, pinpointing exactly what data you need for a given project is important. In this section, we will explore some common secondary data issues so you can feel confident that you are choosing the right data. So as with any project, start by developing a research question to identify exactly what data you are looking for. So in this case, if you're interested in looking at how many minority students are currently involved in public versus private universities and how that compares between different states, coming up with some synonyms to help generate multiple search criteria is helpful because you can start thinking about how different words are for different ideas, and it can give you like a wider net to cast. Some resources may also have thesaurises that you can use to supplement your search terms. You also will want to decide if you want to narrow or broaden your criteria. So what do you mean by, for example, minority students? Do you mean racial minority or like LGBTQ students? When you're talking about where like you're interested in looking at universities, are you looking at cities? Are you looking at the states, the entire country, the world? And sorry. And it's also important to think about how your search might impact what data is available. For example, you're more likely to find political affiliation of House of Representative members instead of finding that same data for local governments across the United States. So based on your brainstorm, it's also important to think about, do you anticipate that you can find all this information in one data set, or will you need multiple data sets in order to get what you need? It's also important after you've brainstormed and come up with a few questions to figure out your data timeline. Does your question require that you look across several disciplines, which may require several sources, or can you reasonably expect to find it using a single source? Has the research been conducted before is something that I feel like a lot of students often don't think about when they start looking for data sets. Sometimes you have a really great question, but that data hasn't been collected. And so you're going to be very hard pressed to find exactly what you want. It's also important to understand if the data is readily available or if it requires some more time-consuming procedures. So merging data sets together, or is the data spread out across several web pages and you need to go manually in and like scrape it or copy and paste it into one document before you can use it. I think it's also important to note that if you are using web scraping, if that's a thing you're engaging in, not all websites will allow you to do this. You should check because you can get into some trouble if you do not check. Can you download the data set already? Is it ready to use? Or do you need to send a request to an organization or to an author? Is the data already de-identified? Or do you need to go through the IRB because you're dealing with data about individuals that is personal information, and so you need clearance ahead of time? Is the data free or do you need to pay for it? And if you need to pay, do you know what you're getting, or is the preview enough for you to know if this data set is worth pursuing? Other things are, is the format open? So is it like a CSV file that you can open on with any software, or is it a proprietary software? So maybe you don't have access to R and it's in an R format, for example. And does the data need to be transformed or cleaned in order to be prepared for analysis? After you've asked those questions about what data you may encounter, I think whenever you're encountering a data set, you should always be inspecting the methodology. This is data that you did not prepare yourself. And so you should be asking these questions to make sure that you really understand what's in this data set and if it fits with your research goals or your project goals. So what was the data's original purpose? how was that population sampled and who was excluded from that population? Maybe you think you're getting a more representative sample than you actually are, and maybe you need to look for additional data sets to supplement that. What was the inclusion and exclusion criteria? Does your research question specifically require a population? Or like when we talked about who was excluded, for example, if a study was conducted online and they were using survey tools, that's going to exclude a lot of individuals who might not have access to the internet. And so those individuals might be people who are elderly, who don't have a computer at home, or individuals with disabilities who might not be able to get to the survey because it was not made accessible in the same way. So those things are good to keep in the back of your mind. How large of a sample size do you require? Are you interested in certain time periods or in trends over time? And what is the smallest data unit for data analysis at the individual level, school level, county level, state level, so on and so forth? Okay, so once you've looked at the methodology, you should also take a step back and think about who put this data set together and is this data credible? Did someone author it? Is there a name actually listed on the data set? Can you connect it to any credible publications? And if you look at the methodology, were there any issues or any sort of biases that stuck out to you? Do the actions taken by the original authors make sense? And the most important bit, is the documentation good enough so that you understand how to use the data? You might have, on the surface, found the perfect data set, but then you look at the variables and you have no idea what they mean, and they were coded, but you didn't actually get a piece of paper or documentation that told you what that coding meant, and then you can't really use it. I'm putting this here because sometimes there are limitations on licensing and what you can do with data. You're not always able to reuse all the data sets you find, depending on your purposes. It's the most common one, CC Creative Commons license, is the most open. And so if you see things like CC or CC BY, you are probably in the clear for reusing your data. But if you're trying to use the data for commercial purposes, say you're working with a company and they're trying to make a product, certain licenses don't allow for that. So that's also just something to keep in mind. And do you need IRB approval on campus? Say, for example, you are using anonymized data, so it doesn't have anything about participant information, and you didn't participate in data collection and you can't re-identify those individuals that are in the data set, then maybe you won't need IRB approval. If you're not sure about any of these things, it's always a good practice to send an email to Julia Mays, and I will include her information, to just double check and ask. But if you are using a data set that requires a subscription, a password, or permission for access, or with human subjects data, then you probably will have to seek IRB approval. And that might you might have to put in more time to do that before you can actually start your research process. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind that it might not be as straightforward as you think. So proposal summaries can be emailed to the IRB for review, or even if you have any questions about is this data good for, is cleared for doing research, you can just send them a question and they will advise you what the best steps will be to take. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Methodologies, things to consider, things that weren't clear that I skipped over? Okay. If we're good, then I'm going to keep going forward. So now that we've covered why you might want to use secondary data and some things you should look for when assessing if the secondary data you found is right for your projects, let's explore a variety of strategies that you can employ when looking for data to help you be more familiar with where you can encounter data sets. So a data repository is an archive or warehouse that collects and houses data. Many repositories commit to long-term storage and work to preserve the data by storing several backups, encouraging documentation for reusability, and provide persistent identifiers to make the data more discoverable. Data repositories are often used by researchers to fulfill data sharing requirements put out by funders or journals, or in order to make their research more reproducible. Sometimes these repositories also offer ways to analyze data in browser. So the best resource for finding data from a specific discipline is searching for a repository using re3data.org. It's a good starting point if you're unsure of where to start looking for certain types of data, and it provides filters to indicate data formats, access, and language. In the next couple of slides, we will explore a few different types of repositories that are good starting points for your research. So the first one is a specialist repository. And in this case, I'm specifically highlighting ICPSR because it is a resource that it's available to you through our campus. So ICPSR is one of the world's oldest and largest social science data archives. It's hosted at the University of Michigan and supported by more than 750 member institutions, including Western. So ICPSR receives data produced by various data producers, such as research agencies, the government, and professors. And then it cleans that data by standardizing the variables and providing documentation, so it's very easy to reuse those data sets. And then it houses them long-term. It also provides some training. So if you're not sure how to use statistical tools, there are some resources available. They also provide summer workshops. There is a login function into ICPSR data because while some data sets are freely available to everyone without a membership, you can see that they'll say public data. By providing your account, you're proving your affiliation to Western Michigan, and as an ICPSR member institution, it means you gain access to all the data sets. So there might be some data that you're not able to access if you don't log in. So if you are looking, I encourage you to log in. It also shows us that you're using this resource and why we should continue paying for it. You can obtain access by clicking the login button that's at the top of the main page once you go into the browser. And all of these slides, if you look at them later, have links to the specific resources. So you can download the slides and play around with some of these resources. I've highlighted a few of the different collections that are very popular within ICPSR. There's a lot of cool things that you can look around. It has a lot of Census Bureau information. It has some information about minorities and health and medical care, some longitudinal studies, and like a collection on advancing research on disability, which informs policy primarily. Okay. Another specialist repository is DataOne, and this, in contrast to ICPSR, is science-focused. So DataOne is a platform for environmental and ecological science, providing access to Earth observational data, and sponsored by NSF. It aggregates data from all or parts of member repository holdings. One of these member repositories is Dryad, which is a community-owned curated repository that stores scientific data from fields of evolutionary, genetic, and ecological biology. So this is a good place to start off with if you are interested in science data and use that browse function to kind of filter down to things that might be applicable to you. In addition to discipline-specific repositories like ICPSR, general purpose repositories are good places to look for data from a variety of disciplines. You have the Open Science Framework, OSF, which is a free open platform for research collaboration, supporting project files and data. You have Figshare, Mendeley, and Zenodo. And these are also all free repositories supporting data and non-traditional research outputs with a variety of data types. So this is primarily, I think, where individual researchers go if they need to deposit their data sets in conjunction with a publication. So if you want to look for a specific topic that doesn't kind of fit into a specific discipline, these are good starting points as well. In addition to the specialist and generalist repositories, there are also institutional data repositories, which are connected to a university and offer individuals who are members of that university a place to preserve and share their data long term. While some institutions maintain their own repositories, others rely on existing platforms to host their data. A good example of that is the Harvard Dataverse, which hosts data from 68 institutions and can be a good resource for finding data connected with publication. So very similar to the generalist repositories, you can kind of find a lot of different things within these. They're a little bit more dispersed than a generalist repositories, but if, for example, you come across a publication and you know someone is at a specific university, it might be worth looking to see if there is an institutional data repository tied with that university and if they're hosting that data there. And I just wanted to run down some more places. These are more specific than the three options that I just talked about. So government data, the best place if you're looking for government data to look is probably data.gov, which is the home of the US government's open data on a variety of topics: agriculture, climate, energy, local governments, maritime, ocean data, and older adult health data. Perhaps the most known open data government is the census data, which has its own platform for viewing, combining, and analyzing data sets at data.census.gov. We also talked about ICPSR. That's also another place you can go to look at census data. Another data source that is popular on this campus is educational data through the National Center for Education Statistics, which provides statistics for education from early childhood through post-secondary education. UN Data is an international statistical database with resources compiled by the United Nations on topics like agriculture, crime, communication, population, science and technology, and so on and so forth. So if you're interested in topics at a more global level, this could be a good source for you. In addition to the government data, which includes some statistics, another great resource is the World Factbook, which provides basic intelligence on the history, people, government, economy, energy, geography, terrorism, and transnational issues for 206 world entities. So these will kind of give you statistics in addition to not so much raw data, but they can be good resources if you're looking for a specific figure. The library also has some data subscriptions that can be helpful to a variety of disciplines, although they're primarily used by business and marketing. I would like to highlight these two resources, Mintel and Statista, which when accessed through the library database give you a full access to data and reports. And I would suggest if you wanted to access these two that you actually go to the library homepage and go into database and access it that way, because it will prompt you to log in and you'll get more full access than you would otherwise get. So Mintel US Reports is market intelligent reports on hundreds of consumer industries with special focus on consumers and their preferences. It also has full data books and methodology. And Statista is a search for user-friendly statistical tables and infographics from more than 80,000 topics, covering market and consumer data and many more areas of interest. Sources of information include market researcher, trade publications, scientific journals, and government databases. There are many more things that we offer through the library, so if that's a question that you have or you're not sure where to look, you should feel free to reach out and we can try to point you in the right direction. Other than looking directly through a database or into a repository and sorting that way, a strategy for finding data sets is searching for articles on a given topic. So some articles will contain a link to data sets within the manuscript, especially if the funding agency or journal has mandated that their authors release their data. This can be a little tricky to locate, so I would recommend Control F to search the document for any mentions of data availability or data set. Publishers such as Springer, Elsevier, and PLOS are increasingly requiring that authors provide a data availability statement as part of their data policies, encouraging data submissions into repositories if possible, or providing information on how data sets can be obtained upon request. Some data can also be found in supplementary data files uploaded by the journal, though the journal does not have a requirement to maintain these files long term. Sometimes the best way to obtain a data set from a specific article is to contact the author directly. In many disciplines, contacting the first, second, and last, so the most senior authors, would be the best strategy, although finding the most up-to-date contact information can be a little tricky. There's also a chance that even if the authors respond, they might no longer have access to the data. The data might be in a format that requires a specific piece of software, or the data set might not be well documented or curated for reuse. So be prepared to explore different options in case this one falls through. I will also mention that within ICPSR, you can actually do a reverse search. Instead of searching for data, you can search for publications, and then you can find data sets that those publications used within that repository. So if you are interested in topics that others have covered, or you are interested in data based on a specific topic, sometimes finding a publication and seeing how individuals used a specific data set could be a good indicator for you to find out whether that data set would work for your project. This is a bit of a different option, different approach. If you're really finding that you can't find what you're looking for within repositories, or you don't know where to start looking, using the dataset search within Google or the advanced search within Google are both really good options. So the dataset search is a search engine specifically for datasets. You can use a simple keyword search and you can discover hundreds of thousands of data sets of hope like in repositories across the web. This might also bring up a variety of data set mentions that might be behind paywalls or might not actually contain downloadable data sets, so you should exhibit caution when using this option. But it can be a good starting point because then you can start narrowing down where you can find those specific data sets. The Google Advanced Search is also an option that I use a lot if an individual contacts me and I'm not really sure where the data lives. It's a good way to search for data sets that might be less discoverable because they're links on websites instead of a structured page that you might find in repositories, or that might be in a less traditional format. So the data might be contained within a PDF or a .doc document. So if you're using this option, be very careful to check the source and its credibility, but it can give you things that traditional repositories may not show you. This is also a bit of a backhand approach for finding data sets, but there is an initiative called Collections as Data that started off with kind of incentivizing universities to make their cultural heritage collections or archival collections more discoverable by researchers. So if you're interested in archival or special collections data, it is possible that some of that data might have been made available digitally in a more reusable format through these institutions. there is a funded cohort project list available online that you could search for, but I wanted to add a few just to give you a sense of what's out there. So by no means is this a comprehensive list, but some of the collections as data that are out there is the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's plain text files of laws from the Jim Crow era for text analysis, including tutorials on how to conduct text analyses. The University of Denver's database of early 20th century tuberculosis patient records from Jewish and Eastern immigrants staying at a tuberculosis sanatorium in Denver. The University of Arizona's plain text files of 8 newspapers published in the border regions of Arizona and Sonora, Mexico in the first half of the 20th century, and the National Library of Scotland's plain text files from a variety of collections. So I should also mention that this university was inspired by this project, and we're actually planning on releasing 2 data sets based on lighthouse logs in our digitized collection by the end of the semester. So if that's something that might be of interest for you, or stay tuned and keep an eye out. And finally, I wanted to leave you with a few miscellaneous sources that did not neatly fit into the previous categories. So data journals are on the rise, and specifically they're journals that publish data papers that describe data sets in order to facilitate data reuse and avoid duplication of efforts. There have been posts out there that have listed some of these data journals, but the ones I've provided you are 3 that are good places to start your search. So you have Elsevier's Data in Brief, Nature's Scientific Data, and the Multidisciplinary Digital Publishing Institute's data. So all of these will kind of give you a rundown of what data is available. And because researchers are publishing these data papers, data sets that you may find in conjunction or connected with these publications might be more reusable than other things that you might find on the internet. Data journalism is also a great place to look. There have been efforts, even during the pandemic, by the New York Times or the Atlantic to release COVID data that was county or state level. And a lot of reporters are, because there's a large group of them, are able to aggregate large amounts of data. So contacting reporters and seeing what publications are putting out is sometimes also a good starting point, especially if you're looking for current issues. There's also a publication called 538, which releases data behind its stories and infographics spanning back to 2014. And there is even a weekly data newsletter on data sets. It's called Data is Plural, in case you want to be kept abreast of interesting data sets that you might not have found on your own. And this is going to be kind of a hodgepodge of an issue because they just find interesting data sets online. In short, data is pretty much everywhere. And that's pretty much it. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what you should look for and where you could find it. So thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope this workshop helped you feel more confident about identifying if secondary data is right for you and figuring out your specific data needs and exposing you to some strategies that you can go about looking for data. I am going to put a link into chat to a Google Drive that includes the slides for this presentation. It also includes an attendance link, so you could confirm that you made it to this presentation. And it also includes a link to a feedback form if you would like to provide some feedback for this presentation. I will also say that if you liked this workshop or are interested in other data topics, I'm also offering 2 more workshops this week that are slightly longer than this one. One about best practices for managing your data in spreadsheets on Wednesday, and the other is how to clean your spreadsheet data using the free program OpenRefine on Friday. All the workshop recordings for this presentation and for other presentations I'm running as well as my colleague's presentation can be found on the library's YouTube page. I know finding data can be tricky. And so if you find yourself having a hard time finding the data that you need or asking the right questions, and you can feel free to send me an email or schedule a consultation. I'm happy to walk you through this or also provide an additional set of eyes to see if we can find you the data you're looking for. I'm also happy to talk to you about any other data needs you may have, including how best to set up a new project or manage a current one, what storage options you have on campus, how to document and prepare your data for long-term storage after your project's over, or how to prepare your data for sharing. I'm also happy to take any questions you have now. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask me or ask me through the chat, feel free. I will be hanging around here until 5. Thank you so much.